The Zathrian collective had ruled the Outer Rim territories for 300 years, without anyone daring to challenge their authority. Their warships moved through space like predators, and every species that encountered them learned quickly to bow or die. The Zathrians believed the galaxy belonged to them by right of conquest, and for centuries no one had proven them wrong. When humanity began spreading outward from Earth, establishing colonies on distant worlds, the Zathrians watched with growing irritation. These newcomers did not ask permission. They did not acknowledge Zathrian territorial claims. They simply arrived, built their settlements, and acted as if the Outer Rim was free space available to anyone brave enough to claim it. Commander Kyle Harrison stood at the large viewing window of the civilian transport ship Horizon's Edge, watching the twin suns of New Portland sink below the horizon. The colony world spread out beneath the orbital station in a patchwork of green farmland and gleaming cities. 50,000 people called this place home now, and every one of them had worked to transform a barren rock into something beautiful. The terraforming had taken 15 years, but humanity was patient when it came to building new worlds. Kyle's wife Linda taught mathematics at the colony's largest school. She loved her job, loved watching the children of pioneers learn and grow. Their daughter Sophie had just turned 8 years old, and she wanted to be a pilot like her father. Kyle had promised to teach her to fly once she turned 12. He smiled at the memory of her excitement, her eyes shining as she talked about zooming through space between the stars. The transport ship was scheduled to depart in 2 hours, carrying refined metals to the processing station at the edge of the system. It was routine work, boring even, but Kyle didn't mind. Boring meant safe, and safe meant he would return home to his family in 3 days as planned. He had already picked out a gift for Linda at the station's small marketplace, a necklace made from New Portland crystals that caught the light like captured starfire. The alarm started as a low pulse that quickly rose to a screaming wail. Kyle's blood went cold. That sound meant only one thing. Hostile vessels detected. The colony had 6 orbital defense platforms, automated weapon systems designed to protect against pirates or raiders. They had never been fired in anger, not once in the 2 years since their installation. Kyle ran to the bridge, his boots pounding against the metal floor. The captain was already there, her face pale as she stared at the tactical display. 12 red dots had appeared at the system's edge, each one representing a ship that had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The computer was analyzing their signatures, trying to identify their origin. The answer came back in cold, digital text. Zathrian warships, capital-class vessels, each one capable of glassing a planet from orbit. Kyle's hands went numb. There were protocols for this situation, procedures written by military planners who hoped they would never be needed. The colony's defense coordinator would be hailing the Zathrian fleet, demanding to know their intentions, buying time for civilians to reach shelters. The defense platforms would be powering up, their weapons systems coming online. None of it would matter. The Zathrian fleet broadcast no message. They issued no warnings, made no demands. Their doctrine was simple and brutal. They had claimed this territory 2 centuries ago, and any settlement here was illegal. Illegal settlements were to be removed with maximum efficiency. The Zathrians did not believe in half measures. The defense platforms opened fire first. Missiles and energy beams lanced across the darkness, targeting the nearest Zathrian cruiser. Kyle watched the tactical display with desperate hope. The platform's weapons were cutting-edge human technology, designed by the best engineers Earth could produce. The Zathrian cruiser's shields flared bright blue as the weapons impacted. For a moment, Kyle thought they might actually damage it. Then the cruiser returned fire. A single plasma beam, brilliant white and impossibly hot, struck the defense platform dead center. The installation vaporized in a flash of superheated metal and escaping atmosphere. 5 more defense platforms died in the next 30 seconds. The 6th managed to land a lucky shot that penetrated a Zathrian cruiser's shields and tore through its hull. The enemy ship broke apart in a satisfying explosion that gave Kyle a moment of savage joy. At least they had hurt the bastards. At least humanity had drawn blood. The remaining 11 Zathrian warships accelerated toward New Portland. The colony's distress signal was already broadcasting, a desperate cry for help that would take 47 years to reach Earth at light speed. Faster-than-light communication didn't exist. Messages traveled on ships, and the nearest human military vessel was 3 star systems away. Kyle's hands gripped the edge of the console as he watched the inevitable unfold. The captain had already ordered the Horizon's Edge to burn at maximum acceleration away from the planet. They were a civilian transport with no weapons and thin armor. Their only hope was to run and pray the Zathrians considered them beneath notice. The first plasma bombardment began at 1847 hours station time. The Zathrian warships spread out in a geometric pattern above New Portland and began firing in sequence. Each shot hit with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The atmosphere itself seemed to scream as it was superheated, clouds vaporizing and reforming in roiling patterns visible from orbit. Kyle watched the city where Linda taught disappear under a plasma strike. The school, the parks where Sophie played, the house they had built together, all of it gone in an eye blink. The tactical display showed the temperature readings on the surface climbing rapidly. 1,000 degrees, 2,000, 5,000. He wanted to look away but couldn't. 50,000 people were dying down there. Friends, neighbors, families who had dreamed of building something new among the stars. The Zathrians were methodical about it, their targeting precise and efficient. They hit every major settlement, every power station, every structure larger than a storage shed. The bombardment lasted 3 hours. When it ended, New Portland's surface glowed cherry red, cooling slowly in the vacuum of space. The oceans had boiled away. The carefully engineered atmosphere was escaping into space, stripped away by the thermal violence. Nothing lived on that world anymore. Nothing could. The Zathrian fleet lingered just long enough to ensure complete destruction, then vanished back into faster-than-light travel as efficiently as they had arrived. They left no message, no explanation. To them, this was simply housekeeping, removing an unauthorized infestation from territory they owned. Kyle Harrison stood frozen at the console, staring at the dead world below. His hands were shaking. His mind refused to process what he had witnessed. Linda was gone. Sophie was gone. Everything he loved had been erased as casually as wiping dust from a table. The captain's voice came from very far away. "We need to get to the rally point. Other colonies will need to be warned." But Kyle barely heard her. He was thinking about Sophie's last words to him before he left. "Bring me back something from the station, Daddy. Something shiny." He had promised he would. Now he had nothing to bring back and no daughter to give it to. The Horizon's Edge limped toward the system's edge, one of only 7 ships that escaped New Portland's destruction. Behind them, the world cooled and darkened, becoming just another lifeless rock orbiting a distant sun. 50,000 human lives reduced to ash and memory. The Zathrians had made their point. They were the apex predators of this region of space, and humanity was just prey. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed humanity would accept this. They assumed people like Kyle Harrison would grieve and move on, would understand that the universe was cruel and the strong did as they pleased. They didn't understand humans at all. They didn't know that some wounds don't heal, some losses don't fade, and some species, when pushed past their breaking point, don't collapse. They become something far more dangerous. The news reached Earth 3 weeks after New Portland died. A cargo hauler carrying survivors made the jump to Sol system and broadcast what they had witnessed. Within hours, every news network on the planet was showing the footage. Thermal images of a world being cooked alive. Sensor recordings of Zathrian warships methodically destroying everything humanity had built. Admiral Catherine Blake watched the footage in silence from her office at Unified Earth Command headquarters. She had served in the military for 32 years, most of it during peacetime. The last major conflict had been the Unification Wars. Brutal fighting between Earth nations that finally ended when everyone realized they had to work together or die divided. That was 60 years ago, before humanity reached for the stars. Now the stars had reached back and showed their teeth. The emergency session of the Unified Earth Command was called within 6 hours of the news breaking. Representatives from every nation and colony gathered in the Great Hall, their faces grim. Admiral Blake stood at the central podium as more reports came in. New Portland wasn't alone. 6 more colonies had fallen in the days following the first attack. New Seattle, Terra Verde, Hope's Landing, Freedom Station, Nova Terra, and Bright Horizons. 300,000 human beings dead in total, their settlements reduced to cooling slag. The Zathrian Collective had published a declaration through their diplomatic channels. The statement was cold and formal. They claimed prior territorial rights to the Outer Rim systems. Human colonies were illegal intrusions. The settlements had been removed with appropriate force. Humanity was advised to respect Zathrian boundaries or face further consequences. President Alan Morris stood to address the assembly. He was 70 years old, a career diplomat who had spent his life negotiating peaceful solutions to conflicts. His hands trembled as he gripped the podium. We built our colonies in peace. We sent our children to those worlds with hope in our hearts. We believed the universe was large enough for everyone. The Zathrians have taught us otherwise. They have shown us that peaceful intentions mean nothing without the strength to defend them. The vote came quickly. There was no debate, no discussion of alternatives. The resolution passed with complete unanimity. Humanity would go to war. Admiral Blake received her new orders that evening. She was given command of all military forces and granted authority to do whatever was necessary to win. The president signed executive orders that transformed Earth's entire economy overnight. Every shipyard, every factory, every research facility was now working for the war effort. The civilian population responded with a fury that surprised even the military planners. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. People lined up for blocks, waiting hours just to sign enlistment papers. Young and old, skilled and unskilled, everyone wanted to contribute. The Zathrians had struck at civilians, at families, at children. Humanity took that personally. Kyle Harrison walked into a recruitment center 4 days after escaping New Portland. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time since watching his world die. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw plasma fire raining down. The recruiting officer took one look at his credentials and nodded. We need experienced pilots desperately. People who know how to handle ships in deep space. People with motivation. The officer glanced at Kyle's file where it noted his family status. Wife and daughter, both deceased, New Portland Colony. I'm sorry for your loss, Harrison. Everyone is. But we're going to make them pay for every single person they killed. I promise you that. Kyle signed the papers without hesitation. The grief would come later. Right now he had a purpose, something to focus on besides the crushing emptiness. He would learn to fly military fighters. He would learn to kill Zathrians, and he would do it until either they were destroyed or he was. Training began immediately, and it was brutal. The military compressed what normally took 2 years into 6 months. Pilots trained 18 hours a day, learning combat maneuvers, weapon systems, and emergency procedures. Many washed out, unable to handle the physical and mental strain. Kyle thrived on it. The harder they pushed, the better he performed. Pain and exhaustion were welcome distractions from memory, but training was only part of the transformation happening across human space. Deep in the research facilities on Luna Base, scientists were working on projects that had been theoretical for decades. Dr. Peter Cole led the weapons development program, and he had been given unlimited resources and zero ethical restrictions. The Zathrians use organic computing systems in their ships, Dr. Cole explained to a group of military officers. Their vessels are partially alive, grown as much as built. This gives them advantages in processing speed and adaptability, but it also creates a vulnerability we can exploit. His team had been studying quantum disruption technology for years. In theory, it could target biological matter at the molecular level, causing it to break down catastrophically. The technology had never been weaponized because the ethical implications were horrifying. Now those concerns were irrelevant. The Zathrians had killed children. Humanity's moral restraints had died with them. The first prototype quantum disruption missile was ready within 4 months. Testing showed it could penetrate Zathrian shields and cause their organic ship systems to literally rot from within. The crew would die screaming as their ship fell apart around them. Dr. Cole felt no guilt about it. His sister had been on Hope's Landing with her family. Turnabout was fair play. The shipyards worked around the clock producing warships. Earth had never built military vessels on this scale before. The orbital yards that once constructed colony transports and cargo haulers now churned out destroyers, cruisers, and the first human dreadnoughts. Engineers pulled designs from classified military archives, ships that had been planned during the unification wars but never built because peace broke out. Every ship was built with one purpose: to kill Zathrians as efficiently as possible. The Zathrian Collective monitored Earth's military buildup through their intelligence networks. Their analysts reported the activity to the ruling council with mild concern. Humans were constructing perhaps 50 or 60 warships. That was more than expected, but hardly threatening. The Zathrian fleet numbered in the thousands, spread across dozens of systems. They were veterans of countless campaigns against species that tried to resist their expansion. The Council decided to establish a defensive perimeter around their core systems and wait. The humans would eventually realize the futility of resistance. They would negotiate. They would accept Zathrian dominance and retreat to their inner colonies. It was how these situations always resolved. The Zathrians had conquered 40 different species over 3 centuries. None had ever mounted an effective resistance once the initial strikes were complete. Humanity would be no different. They were so very wrong. 6 months after New Portland burned, Admiral Blake stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's first true warship. It was 5 times larger than any civilian vessel ever built, bristling with weapons and armored with the latest defensive plating. Around it floated 299 other warships, the first fleet of unified Earth, 300 ships built in 6 months. The Zathrians had expected 50 or 60. Their intelligence had failed catastrophically because they didn't understand human industrial capacity or human motivation. When humanity wanted something badly enough, when they were properly motivated by rage and grief, they could accomplish the impossible. Kyle Harrison sat in the cockpit of his fighter aboard the carrier UES Vengeance. His call sign was painted on the fuselage in simple letters, New Portland. Every pilot who had lost family in the attacks had done something similar. They wanted the Zathrians to know exactly why they were dying. Admiral Blake reviewed the tactical plan one final time. The target was the Keswick system, a major Zathrian military outpost. They would hit it hard and fast, showing the enemy that humanity was not prey. The objective was simple: kill everything that moved and make sure the entire galaxy knew about it. All ships report ready. Admiral, the communications officer announced. Catherine Blake allowed herself a cold smile. The Zathrians thought they had cowed humanity with their show of force. They thought 300,000 dead civilians would break human will to resist. Instead, they had created 300,000 reasons for vengeance. They had awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping since the unification wars ended. The capacity for total war, the willingness to do whatever was necessary to win, the understanding that sometimes mercy was a luxury that couldn't be afforded. Signal the fleet, Admiral Blake ordered. All ships prepare for jump. Target is Keswick system. We're going to teach the Zathrians what happens when you attack humanity. We're going to show them the dragon they woke up. The fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving Earth behind. 300 warships carrying humanity's rage toward an enemy that had no idea what was coming. The dragon was awake, and it was hungry for blood. The Zathrian Border Patrol commander Velzoth was reviewing routine sensor logs when the alarm systems activated across his entire station. His primary monitor lit up with contact warnings, dozens of them appearing simultaneously at the edge of the Keswick system. Ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their signatures burning bright on every sensor array. Velzoth's first thought was that the sensors were malfunctioning. No fleet that large should be able to approach Keswick undetected. His second thought, as the computer finished analyzing the contacts, was far more alarming. 300 human warships had just appeared in Zathrian space. He transmitted an immediate alert to the collective's central command. The response came back within minutes, and it was dismissive in tone. Human vessels are primitive construction. Numbers mean nothing against superior Zathrian technology and combat experience. Hold position and prepare to repel the attack. Reinforcements are not necessary. Velzoth looked at his tactical display with growing unease. The Keswick system was home to 43 Zathrian warships, a substantial defensive force by any standard. But 300 against 43 were not favorable odds regardless of technological advantage. He began positioning his ships for optimal defensive formation anyway, ignoring the overconfident orders from command. Admiral Blake watched the Zathrian response from the bridge of the Retribution. The enemy ships were moving into a standard defensive perimeter around the military station. It was textbook tactics, exactly what human war games had predicted. The Zathrians were experienced warriors, but they were predictable. They followed doctrine rigidly because it had worked for 3 centuries against every opponent they faced. All ships break into attack formations, Blake ordered. Execute Plan Delta 7. Fighter wings launch immediately. The human fleet split apart like a flower blooming in reverse. Carriers launched their fighters in swarms, Destroyers and cruisers formed into hunting packs. The dreadnoughts, including Retribution, took position at maximum weapons range and began charging their main guns. Kyle Harrison felt his fighter launch from the carrier's bay with a kick that pressed him back into his seat. Around him, 200 other fighters were doing the same, spreading out in a coordinated pattern that would have been impossible without months of intensive training. His hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, checking weapon systems and shield status. "New Portland Squadron, form on me," Kyle transmitted. "We have the left flank. Target priority is their command ship." 12 fighters acknowledged and moved into formation behind him. They had all lost someone in the Colonie attacks. Every single pilot in this squadron had personal reasons for being here. That made them dangerous in ways the Zathrians wouldn't expect. The first weapons exchange began at maximum range. Zathrian plasma beams lanced across the darkness, brilliant streams of superheated matter that could vaporize a ship on contact. Human missiles answered, thousands of them creating a wave of explosions that lit up space like a new sun being born. The Zathrians learned their first lesson quickly. Human ships were faster than their intelligence reports suggested. Much faster. The destroyers danced between plasma beams with an agility that seemed impossible for vessels their size. Pilots pushed their ships to performance limits that should have torn them apart, trusting in engineering that had been refined under the pressure of total war production. Velzoth watched 3 of his cruisers chase a human destroyer into what should have been a killing box. The human ship led them on, seeming to flee in panic. Then it spun on its axis in a maneuver that violated every principle of momentum Velzoth understood, and fired its main guns at point-blank range. 2 Zathrian cruisers died before they could adjust their tactics. The human destroyer's shields failed under return fire, and it exploded. But the trap had cost Velzoth ships he couldn't afford to lose. Worse, he was seeing the same pattern repeated across the battlefield. Human ships fought with reckless aggression, sacrificing themselves to guarantee kills. It was almost suicidal, except it was working. Kyle's squadron reached their target, a Zathrian battlecruiser that served as the fleet's command vessel. Point defense systems opened up, filling space with defensive fire that turned 2 of his fighters into expanding clouds of debris. Kyle didn't slow down. He couldn't think about the pilots he had just lost. Thinking meant hesitating, and hesitation meant death. "Arm quantum disruption missiles," Kyle ordered. "We only get one shot at this." The missiles were experimental technology, rushed into production without full testing. Each fighter carried 2, and no one was completely certain they would work as designed. But Dr. Cole's team had promised they would penetrate Zathrian shields, and that was enough. Kyle's targeting computer locked onto the battlecruiser's hull. "All ships fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark." 10 missiles launched simultaneously from the surviving fighters in his squadron. They streaked across the remaining distance, small and fast enough that point defense systems struggled to track them all. 7 were destroyed in flight. 3 got through. The quantum disruption warheads detonated against the Zathrian battlecruiser's hull, and Kyle watched through his sensors as something horrifying happened. The ship's organic systems began to die. The biological computing networks that controlled everything from navigation to life support breaking down at the molecular level. The battlecruiser's shields flickered and died. Its weapons went offline. Emergency signals broadcasted across every frequency as the crew realized their ship was rotting around them. The massive vessel went dark and began to drift, its engines dead, its systems failing one by one. Kyle felt a savage satisfaction watching it die. This was what New Portland had looked like from orbit. This was what the Zathrians had done to 50,000 people. Now they knew how it felt. The battle raged for 4 hours. Human ships died by the dozens, their wreckage adding to the debris field that grew around Keswick Station. But Zathrian ships died too, and they died faster. The quantum disruption missiles proved devastatingly effective against their organic technology. The human pilots proved more aggressive than any enemy the Zathrians had faced before. Admiral Blake watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction. They were winning. The cost was high, 41 human ships destroyed and thousands of crew dead, but they were winning. The Zathrians were learning that superior technology meant nothing against superior motivation. Velzoth knew his position was collapsing. He had lost 60% of his fleet, and the humans showed no signs of slowing their assault. He transmitted a final desperate message to Central Command. Human forces are not what we expected. Request immediate reinforcements. They fight like creatures possessed. They sacrifice their own ships without hesitation. We cannot hold this position. The response from Central Command was silence. They were monitoring the battle, watching their forces get systematically destroyed by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. The collective's ruling council was in emergency session, trying to understand how their intelligence had failed so catastrophically. The last Zathrian warship in the Keswick system exploded at 21:47 hours. The battle was over. The military station was a floating wreck. The orbital facilities were damaged beyond repair. Human losses were significant, but the Zathrians had been completely annihilated. Admiral Blake ordered the construction of a monument in orbit around the ruined station. Engineers worked quickly, assembling a structure from salvaged materials. When it was complete, it broadcasted a message on every known frequency in every language the collective used. For New Portland, for New Seattle, for Terra Verde, for Hope's Landing, for Freedom Station, for Nova Terra, for Bright Horizons, for the 300,000 humans you murdered without mercy. This is only the beginning. You wanted war. Now you have it. Kyle Harrison docked his fighter back on the carrier with hands that shook from adrenaline crash. He had survived his first major combat engagement. 6 of his squadron mates had not. Their names would be added to the memorial walls that every human ship now carried. But they had won. They had hit the Zathrians hard and proven that humanity could fight back. The dragon had breathed fire and the enemy had burned. News of the Keswick battle spread across both human and Zathrian space within days. The collective's propaganda tried to spin it as a minor setback, an outlier that wouldn't affect the overall strategic situation. But the warriors who had fought at Keswick told different stories. They spoke of human pilots who flew like demons, of weapons that killed ships from within, of an enemy that refused to stop coming no matter how many died. Back on Earth, the shipyards doubled their production schedules. Dr. Cole's team moved on to even more terrible weapons. And millions more humans volunteered for military service, each one carrying rage in their hearts. The Zathrians had expected humanity to fold after losing a few colonies. Instead, they had created an enemy that would stop at nothing to achieve victory. The dragon was fully awake now, and it was very angry indeed. The Zathrian collective had never experienced an enemy that grew stronger during a conflict. Their entire military doctrine assumed that both sides would be worn down by attrition until one side accepted reasonable peace terms. War was supposed to be expensive and exhausting, pushing everyone toward negotiation. Humanity had a different philosophy entirely. Captain Jennifer Cole commanded the destroyer UES Fury's Edge, and she was the daughter of the scientist who had created the quantum disruption weapons. She had joined the military specifically to see her father's work used against the species that murdered civilians. The Banther shipyards were her target, a massive orbital construction facility where the Zathrians built half their fleet. The raid on Banther involved 12 human destroyers against minimal defense. The Zathrians had pulled most of their military forces back to core systems after the disaster at Keswick. They assumed humanity would need months to rebuild after that battle. They were wrong again. Jennifer's ship led the attack run through the shipyard's defensive perimeter. Automated weapons fired streams of plasma that lit up her shields like festival lights. She ignored the warning alarms and focused on her target, a half-completed battle cruiser sitting in its construction cradle. The quantum disruption torpedo launched smoothly and struck the unfinished ship dead center. The Zathrian vessel began to decay immediately, its organic components dying even though it had never been truly alive. The construction cradle collapsed as structural supports failed. The entire assembly crashed into the shipyard's main facility, triggering a cascade of secondary explosions. But Jennifer wasn't finished. Human forces had brought something new to this raid, something Dr. Cole's team had developed specifically for this purpose: self-replicating mining drones, tiny machines that could consume metal and produce copies of themselves. They were supposed to be used for asteroid mining in peacetime. Now they were weapons. Thousands of drones deployed into the asteroid field that fed raw materials to the shipyard. They began eating everything, multiplying exponentially. Within hours, they would consume every available resource. Within days, the entire asteroid field would be gone. converted into billions of useless drones that would eventually run out of material and shut down. The Zathrians could rebuild the shipyard, but they would have nothing to build ships from. The Banther system was effectively dead as a military asset. Jennifer ordered the final element of the attack: quantum disruption mines, dormant devices that would activate if any Zathrian vessel entered the system for the next century. The mines were scattered throughout the system on random trajectories, impossible to track or clear without triggering them. The 12 human destroyers jumped back to friendly space, having lost only one ship. They had destroyed 50 Zathrian vessels under construction and rendered an entire star system unusable. The cost-to-benefit ratio was extraordinary. Commander Ryan Phillips led a different kind of warfare. He commanded a special operations team that hit Zathrian installations on the ground, places where ships couldn't reach. Their missions had a specific purpose: steal intelligence data from Zathrian command centers. Ryan's team infiltrated a communications hub on the Zathrian colony world of Drexus. They moved through the facility like ghosts, their armor's stealth systems making them nearly invisible. The Zathrians had never faced human ground forces before, and their security was designed to stop other Zathrians, not humans who fought with entirely different tactics. The data they extracted was priceless. Strategic deployment plans, supply line routes, communication protocols, and fleet coordination schedules. Within 8 months of the war beginning, humanity understood Zathrian military operations better than most Zathrian commanders did. Admiral Blake used this intelligence to plan something audacious. She called it Operation Dracon, and it made several of her officers pale when she explained it. Humanity would strike 40 Zathrian systems simultaneously, hitting not military targets but industrial capacity. Shipyards, refineries, manufacturing centers, everything that kept the Zathrian war machine running. They expect us to fight like they do, Blake explained to her assembled fleet commanders. Gradual escalation, measured responses, eventual negotiation. We're going to show them that humans don't fight wars that way. We fight to win, and we don't stop until the enemy can't fight back. The operation required coordination across 2,000 human warships, now spread throughout the combat zone. Every ship had to hit its target within a 6-hour window. The timing was critical. If the Zathrians realized what was happening, they could reinforce threatened systems and the plan would fail. Kyle Harrison had been promoted to squadron leader after surviving 5 major engagements. He led his pilots in the assault on the Mithrin refineries, facilities that processed fuel for half the Zathrian fleet. The refineries were protected by a dozen warships and extensive orbital defenses. His approach was simple and brutal. Human carriers launched every fighter they had in a massive wave that overwhelmed point defense systems through sheer numbers. Losses were catastrophic, but the mission succeeded. The refineries exploded in a series of blasts that lit up the planet's night side like a second sun. Hundreds of Zathrian warships were now stranded in deep space, waiting for fuel shipments that would never arrive. They would have to be towed back to friendly ports, taking other ships out of service to do it. The ripple effects would cripple Zathrian fleet operations for months. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Cole's team had been studying Zathrian biology since the war began, analyzing bodies recovered from destroyed ships. They discovered something remarkable. The Zathrians were vulnerable to a specific electromagnetic frequency. Exposure caused intense pain in their nervous systems without permanent physical damage. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was a communications specialist who saw the military application immediately. We can weaponize their own communication network. Every receiver becomes a weapon. Every Zathrian connected to their system gets hit simultaneously. The ethical debate in the War Council lasted less than an hour. President Morris made the final decision. They bombed our colonies without warning. They killed children in their schools. They started this war. We're going to finish it using every tool we have. The electromagnetic attack happened on the same day as Operation Dracon. Human hackers had penetrated Zathrian communication networks months ago, using stolen access codes. Now they activated hidden programs that turned every communication device in Zathrian space into a transmitter, broadcasting the pain frequency. Millions of Zathrians collapsed simultaneously, their nervous systems overloaded by signals coming from their own technology. The effect lasted only minutes before emergency systems shut down the networks, but the psychological impact was enormous. Humanity had reached into Zathrian homes and hurt them without firing a shot. The collective's ruling council convened an emergency session as reports flooded in from across their empire. 30% of their industrial capacity was gone. Their fleet was scattered and undersupplied. Their population was traumatized by an attack they couldn't defend against. And the humans showed no signs of slowing down. Council leader Vrextar read the intelligence reports with growing horror. Human ship production was accelerating, not declining. They had 2,000 warships now and more launching every day. Their weapons technology was advancing rapidly, each new design more lethal than the last, and their soldiers fought with an intensity that bordered on madness. How did our intelligence fail so completely? Vrextar demanded. We were told humans were weak, that they valued individual lives too highly to wage effective war. We were told they would negotiate after the first defeats. The intelligence director had no good answers. They were peaceful before we attacked their colonies. We interpreted peaceful behavior as weakness. We didn't understand that they were peaceful by choice, not necessity. We gave them a reason to stop being peaceful. Vrextar studied the casualty reports. The collective had lost 800 warships in 8 months of fighting. Human losses were higher in absolute numbers but lower as a percentage of their fleet, and humans were replacing losses faster than the Zathrians could. We need to seek terms, one council member suggested. Offer reparations and territorial concessions. End this before it destroys us. Vrextar composed a message to Earth's government offering peace negotiations. He offered to pay for rebuilding the destroyed colonies. He offered to recognize human territorial claims. He offered everything except the one thing humans actually wanted: justice for 300,000 murdered civilians. Admiral Blake received the Zathrian peace offer and rejected it without consulting civilian leadership. She transmitted her response directly to the collective's council, and her words were cold as vacuum. You don't get to murder 300,000 people and then negotiate as equals. You wanted war. You attacked civilians without mercy. Now you'll experience defeat without mercy. We're coming for your home system, and we won't stop until your ability to threaten humanity is permanently destroyed. The Zathrian Council realized with sick certainty that they had made a terrible mistake. The war entered its final phase 18 months after New Portland died. The human fleet numbered over 2,000 warships now, a force that would have been unimaginable before the Zathrians made their fatal mistake. Every ship was crewed by people who remembered the colony attacks, who carried images of burning worlds in their minds, who would not stop until the job was finished. Admiral Catherine Blake stood on the bridge of the Retribution as the massive fleet prepared for the final jump. The target was the Zathrian home system, the heart of their empire. Intelligence reports showed it was defended by everything the collective had left. Over 600 warships pulled from across their territory in a desperate attempt to protect their homeworld. Kyle Harrison sat in his fighter's cockpit running through pre-flight checks for what felt like the 1,000th time. His hands moved automatically across the controls while his mind wandered. He had stopped counting his kills after reaching 70 enemy ships. The number didn't matter anymore. Every Zathrian vessel was New Portland. Every victory was for Linda and Sophie. His fighter's hull was covered in tallies and kill marks, scorch patterns from near misses, and patches where armor had been replaced after damage. The maintenance crews called it a miracle the ship still flew. Kyle called it determination. He had survived 43 combat missions and he would survive one more. The fleet jumped into Zathrian home space at dawn local time on their world. 2,000 human warships appeared in a coordinated pattern that had taken weeks to plan. The Zathrian defenders reacted immediately, their formations moving to intercept with the precision of experienced warriors. The battle that followed lasted 3 days. It was the largest space engagement in galactic history. Thousands of ships fighting across millions of kilometers. The Zathrians threw everything they had at the human fleet, knowing their entire civilization hung in the balance. They were skilled warriors who had conquered 40 species over 3 centuries. They fought with the courage of people defending their homes, but humanity fought with something the Zathrians couldn't match. Every human pilot, every gunner, every crew member fought with the absolute conviction that losing was not an option. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to accept anything less than total victory. Kyle's squadron engaged Zathrian fighters above their homeworld's largest moon. The enemy pilots were good, better than any he had faced before. They used the moon's gravity well for cover, and coordinated their attacks with textbook precision. 3 of Kyle's wingmen died in the first 10 minutes of combat. He led the survivors through a maneuver that violated every safety regulation in the book, diving into the moon's thin atmosphere and using friction to shed velocity faster than pursuing Zathrians expected. The enemy fighters overshot and Kyle's squadron got behind them. 6 Zathrian fighters died before they could adjust. Jennifer Cole's destroyer was hit by plasma fire that penetrated her shields and vaporized half the ship. She managed to keep the remaining crew alive long enough for rescue ships to arrive, but the Fury's Edge was dead in space. She watched from an escape pod as her ship drifted away, another casualty in a war that consumed vessels and lives with equal efficiency. Commander Ryan Phillips led boarding parties onto damaged Zathrian ships, securing them before they could be destroyed. His mission was to capture as much technology and intelligence as possible. The fights inside enemy vessels were brutal and close quarters, humans and Zathrians killing each other in narrow corridors and engineering spaces. Admiral Blake watched the tactical display as the battle slowly turned in humanity's favor. The Zathrians were fighting brilliantly, but they were running out of ships. Human vessels died by the dozens, but more kept coming, pressing the attack relentlessly. The quantum disruption weapons took a terrible toll on enemy ships, killing them from within. On the second day of battle, the Zathrian defensive line broke. Human ships punched through and reached orbit around the homeworld itself. The remaining enemy vessels formed a last defensive shell around their planet, determined to sell their lives as expensively as possible. The Zathrian Council transmitted one final plea for negotiations. They offered complete surrender, full reparations, anything humanity wanted. Admiral Blake read their message and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Now they wanted mercy. Now they wanted to negotiate. After 300,000 humans lay dead, she could order the bombardment to begin. She could turn their world into glass just as they had done to New Portland. Every weapon system in the fleet was ready. The crews wanted it. The pilots wanted it. She wanted it. But Catherine Blake was a better person than the Zathrians who had started this war. She was also smart enough to understand that genocide would make humanity into the very monsters they were fighting against. She positioned the human fleet in orbit and broadcast a message that reached every Zathrian across their empire. You believed humanity was weak because we built colonies instead of conquest fleets. You mistook our preference for peace as inability to wage war. You killed our children and expected us to retreat. We have defeated you utterly. Your fleets are destroyed. Your industry is crippled. Your people are at our mercy. The Zathrian High Council waited for the plasma bombardment to begin. They had shown no mercy to human colonies. They expected none in return. It was the way of the galaxy. The strong dominated and the weak died. Admiral Blake continued her broadcast. We remember what you did. Every human alive knows the names of the colonies you destroyed. But we are not you. We do not kill civilians. We do not rain fire on helpless populations. We will occupy your military installations and dismantle your ability to threaten others. But your people will live. This is the difference between us. This is why we will build a better galaxy than you ever could. Kyle Harrison heard the Admiral's words through his fighter's communication system. He felt something break inside him, a wall of rage and grief that had sustained him through 18 months of combat. Linda and Sophie were still gone. New Portland was still dead. But at least their deaths hadn't turned him into the kind of person who could murder children in revenge. The armistice was signed 3 weeks later aboard the Retribution. The terms were harsh but survivable. The Zathrian Collective would reduce their military to 20% of previous strength. They would pay reparations over 50 years. Human observers would monitor their compliance and ensure they never threatened another species again. But there would be no genocide, no destruction of their civilization. Council leader Vrextar signed the documents with shaking hands. His empire was broken, his military was destroyed, but his people would survive. He looked at Admiral Blake and spoke quietly. We underestimated you completely. We saw peaceful colonists and assumed weakness. We didn't realize you were dangerous precisely because you chose peace when you could have chosen war. Blake nodded. Remember this moment. Remember what happened when you forced humanity to stop being peaceful. Make sure every species in the galaxy knows this story. We prefer to build rather than destroy. We prefer cooperation over conquest. But if you threaten us, if you attack our civilians, we will burn your empire to ash and then show you mercy anyway, because that's who we are. Kyle stood on the observation deck of the Retribution, looking at the Zathrian homeworld below. Cities covered the surface, billions of people going about their lives. They would live because humanity had chosen mercy over vengeance. He thought about Sophie asking him to bring her something shiny from the station. He thought about Linda teaching mathematics to children who would never grow up. Admiral Blake found him there an hour later. "You did well, Harrison. All of you did. We won this war, did we?" Kyle's voice was hollow. "We became what we hated to win. We built weapons designed to cause maximum suffering. We killed thousands of their people. How is that winning?" "We became what we needed to be," Blake said quietly. "The Zathrians taught us that the universe respects strength, but we taught them that strength without mercy is tyranny. We could have exterminated them. Every pilot in this fleet wanted to, but we didn't. That's the victory that matters." Kyle thought about that for a long time. Across human space, colonies were being rebuilt. New Portland was being terraformed again. Families were starting over. Children were being born who would grow up in a universe where humanity had proven it could defend itself. "We awoke the dragon," Kyle said finally, "but we kept it on a leash. And every species that watches us will know both truths," Blake replied. "We can be their greatest allies or their worst nightmare. The choice is theirs." The Zathrians chose war. They learned what happens. Maybe the next species will choose friendship instead. In the years that followed, dozens of alien civilizations sought diplomatic relations with humanity. Some came out of respect for human engineering and determination. Others came from fear of what humanity could do if provoked. But none ever again made the mistake of seeing human colonists as acceptable targets. The Zathrian War became a legend told across the galaxy. It was a warning story about what happens when you attack a species that fights not for conquest, but for survival. It was a lesson about underestimating peaceful civilizations. It was proof that humanity could wage total war and still maintain its principles.